Chapter 7 The Sliding Rock Pile. I phoned EDF's CEO, got right through and explained the situation. He didn't like my idea at first, but I convinced him and he agreed to all the points Uncle Amerigo had suggested. Before heading over to Rookie's room, I checked the internet. The danger to the glacier, the Ouse, and all the people along its flow to the Atlantic was headline news around the world. No wonder EDF was willing to take a chance with my tool. I explained the situation to Rook and he said he was joining me. This was just what Uncle A had imagined. I told him he couldn't, but just as he was becoming insistent, the beat of helicopter blades filled the air. I sprinted to my workshop, called the rookie to give me a hand with a heavy box, and we hauled it out to the back lawn. A man in a hazmat suit bounded out with another suit for me, and over the chopper's roar, yelled to put it on now. I motioned for him to take the box, and when he returned, he helped me fasten my helmet. The two of us headed for the chopper, but Rook followed us. He followed right behind us. The man saw him, shook his finger, and told Rook he could not join us. Arg, I hated that. He's my bro, you know. During the 15-minute flight, the man introduced himself as a nuclear engineer and said the chopper would give me a brief tour of the terrain before landing. What had been an isolated, nearly invisible mine entrance was now a shambles of rock with large drums carrying the radiation danger symbol. These drums were everywhere. Oh, and I tell you, when you see those radiation symbols, it kind of gives you the chill, man. I could tell some had leaked. The rock slope fell away to a cliff above the glacial meltwater coming down from higher up on the mountain. The chopper set down behind a large rock pillar, maybe 100 meters or so from the mine on a flat space the size of half a football pitch. Downslope, high-tension electric wires rose on transmission towers from under the cliff. I saw that a dam higher up the mountain was there, and I had assumed that there were hydraulic generators there, and these wires really pulling all the power down from those generators. A swarm of technicians was working up on the closest tower. A nuclear engineer pointed them, and he explained that they were tapping enough electricity to power an entire city, and they would pull a cable with that power to us when they were ready. When we disembarked the chopper, he unloaded my device along with the metal scaffolding I'd requested that the EDF send along. Then the chopper rose and headed back toward POW. The engineer opened a pop-up tent to cover my things and commenced his inspection of the apparatus I called the T, as shorthand for the transmuter. He reviewed my work. I felt like a kindergartner. Here I was having my drawing inspected by a teacher. But this engineer was meticulous. He was a serious guy. He asked questions about the material in each component and tested each circuit. Fortunately, even though the T was a prototype, I'd managed to acquire high-quality components, and I'd used only direct electrical connections, knowing that if I'd soldered them, they would easily have melted away when a tremendous amount of electricity was flowing through. Finally, the engineer gave an appreciative nod and a thumbs up, and he asked where I wanted to set up the T. I told him I wanted to fire it from the upslope side of the rock pillar and asked if the radiation levels at that point were safe. He did some readings. They showed acceptable levels of radiation at the pillar's base. My suit could protect me against those, but he advised to not go further upslope. 2 technicians in hazmat suits joined us, and we hauled the T and the scaffolding up and around the rock pillar. As we did, the engineer signaled to a man on a small tractor. He drove over the rocky terrain toward us while unspooling a cable. This cable is about the width of your fist, maybe 3 times the size of the cable the EDF had pulled to connect the stun gun back there at the river. I connected the cable, and the engineer inspected my connection. "Ah, maintenant c'est à vous, monsieur," he said. He raised his hand, raised it as though he was tipping his hat, and then he returned out of danger, downslope and around the pillar. If you had no idea what you were seeing, the T in its scaffolding might have appeared to be a fancy snow cannon like up on the slopes of nearby Salary-Soulin ski resort. My plan to transmute the radiation was to pan the rock and the barrels in an arc from left to right, and then make a return arc. Except for the mineshaft itself, there were no holes or depressions that would prevent the T's lasers from hitting the entire toxic ground. If the T worked as I hoped, the time for this radiation to decay would drop from 400 years to about 25 minutes. And that would be so cool because that would allow the workers to immediately secure the exposed drums and cap the mine. The river would be secured against contamination, and the arduous work to further secure the mine could go forward without risk to the workers. Chapter 8, Firing the T. I stood alone with the T, looking uphill at the broken barrels. It was obvious that a simple thunderstorm could cause at least some of those to slide over the cliff. I'd know within seconds if my plan would succeed. As I removed the T's trigger guard, I was perfectly aware I might disappear in a puff of smoke the moment I pulled the trigger. I also knew the T itself could vibrate uncontrollably. That was sure a risk, and high voltage electric discharges could take place, and they could do unimaginable damage. But look, I'd set my course, and this was not a time for self-doubt. I was doing this. I pulled on my noise-canceling headset, positioned my left hand on the barrel guide, aimed it toward the higher ground on the left. I placed my right forefinger on the trigger, and without hesitation, I pulled it. Crack, 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 crack! My high-intensity, short-pulse, rapid-fire laser went off like a machine gun, not as loud, but with a sharper edge. It gave off more heat than I had anticipated, but it never became too hot to handle, fortunately. The cracking, explosive sounds burrowed into my head at first, but I was able to tune them out by concentrating on panning the T's muzzle to the right with a slight up and down action until it reached the cliff's edge. I gave the 3 barrels closest to the cliff edge extra T time before panning back left and uphill. When I'd fully covered the terrain, I released the trigger. I replaced the guard. I'd just taken my headset off when I heard the sound of a drone. It flew directly at the barrels near the cliff and then up toward the mine shaft, and then it rose higher, and it flew in a wide circle. The engineer approached, and he called out, "No radiation up on the rock slope. Only directly above the mine shaft. We can drop in rock and cap it. A chopper's coming down in 2 minutes with a cleanup crew. When they get off, you get on, and we'll take care of your tea later. You're out of here, with thanks from EDF CEO and the French people. Well done." Hey, the river was safe. Now my heart was in my throat. Tears were dripping down my cheeks and my nose. Chapter 9, Together Again. Looking back, that day seems surreal. Like it could all have been a dream or a story I'd read about somebody else. I felt fear at every turn. My judgment was taxed. I was repeatedly face to face with life and death decisions. I was on the hook the whole day, and for the most part, totally on my own, and without the comfort of other people's affirmation that I was doing the right thing. Sometimes I asked myself if that day ever truly happened. Fortunately, Rookie had been able to reach both Mom and Pops, and each had headed home as soon as I could. I arrived home feeling spaced out like a zombie. I was knackered. And then this zombie walked past the kitchen and realized that it had a practical decision to make this time. what to cook for dinner. When I realized some meals depended on good decisions about when to start cooking so the meal would be ready on time but not burned, I thought that over and opted for pancakes. I could simply prepare the batter and fry them up on demand. As soon as I had a bowl ready, I became a zombie again, and the zombie plopped onto my bed with no energy to even fill Rookie in on the things I'd done. What a great guy, though. He understood and gave me space. An hour or so later, Mom and Pops arrived together. They were wet from top to bottom from the rain that was pelting down. They had no interest in dinner and only wanted to hear our stories. Since Rookie had given them a quick summary on the telephone, their first questions were aimed at me. Mom asked how I ever got EDF to bring me in to address nuclear disposal sites in environmental emergency rather than sending in their own specialists. Well, I explained that EDF CEO didn't like my idea at first because it was unproven. But when I challenged him to describe an alternative to prevent the radioactive waste from falling into the torrent, he shook his head and said he simply did not want to put me at risk. I explained my main risk was that my T device had only been tested with household current and might fail under the huge voltage needed to address this emergency. Well, he hesitated, and then he admitted he was skeptical that I could pull it off. That was why he was truly hesitating. Well, I dug in. I summarized the early tests had been made by Nobel Prize-winning laureates who had invented the concept of transmuting radiation by bombarding it with atoms driven by short, high-intensity laser pulses at high repetition rates. He knew of their work in the laboratory, but also knew the technique had not been field-tested and had not been proven safe. I countered that his engineers could evaluate my device before I used it, but a degree of risk would remain, and I was willing to take that risk. Well, the CEO put my call on hold and asked for an updated weather report. Thunderstorms were expected this evening, and violent downpours were expected in the mountains. I closed the deal with him by pointing out that the torrent below the spill flowed right into the River Ouse, then into the Ador, past the city of Bayonne, and into the Atlantic Ocean. The safety and livelihoods of hundreds of thousands of people in the area were at risk, as was the famous Biarritz resort. All of France would be affected if the radiation were not contained on that cliff. Time was of the essence. He then said if I was willing to take a chance to save the environment, he would too. I used Uncle Amerigo's points to ensure I'd be as protected as possible, and he said a helicopter would arrive shortly. Well, Pop said he didn't even know I was working on the T, and he asked when I built it. I said all the conceptual work, the proof of concept, the real inventing had been done by those brilliant scientists, and I'd taken a shot at building the T just for fun after we'd moved to Powell. I'd made my prototype simply to get a feel for what was involved in bringing such a valuable, complicated device into the world. I also added that if those scientists hadn't been off in Hungary and the U.S., I would have brought them in to help EDF rather than jumping in myself. They were certainly more capable than me. I just happened to be there as needed. Mom and Pops then turned their attention to the spaceship. Pop asked, what do you think the ETs needed the water for? I said I'd imagine two possibilities. One was providing vapor for the ship's side jets, and the other was for cooling their power plant. He added it was unlikely that Borisov creatures actually consumed water, but research in the South China Sea, those eels, he didn't have any facts yet, so he didn't know. So that was an open situation we'd have to look at later. Mom and Pops, they then turned their attention to Rookie. Pops asked, so, Rook, when those ETs captured you and hauled you into their spaceship, did they hurt you? Rookie fidgeted in his chair, and he replied, gee, Pops, that's not exactly how it happened. So just spit it out, man, Mom interjected. Okay, Ricky said. I was kidnapped, but I guess I wasn't really captured. Then Ricky looked up at the ceiling and then down at the floor. Spill the beans, Pop said. The whole story, please. Okay, Ricky continued. Well, I was just, sitting on the riverbank, right where Leo later sat, when this giant ship settled in and blocked the river. It was amazing. It was like magic. Like I'd entered into another world. I jumped up and had trouble believing my eyes. The thing was so big. And then this portal opened and the thing's skin and a ramp extended out 10 meters toward me. I stood and stared like a klutz for a while. And then my fear wore away and I yelled, So what's up with you in there? When nothing happened, I walked halfway up the ramp and yelled again. By this time, I was annoyed that nobody had answered me, so I walked up and stuck my head into the portal. At first, I couldn't see anything because it was dark. But when my eyes adjusted, I saw the snowman Leo dealt with and 3 smaller creatures in the background. They all were made of 3 round balls stacked on top of each other, but the snowman, well, he was slimmer, more cylindrical, and his gray metal skin was smoother and lighter than theirs. The 3 other creatures looked toward the snowman. That seemed to make the side of his body opened up. Then an arm came out and he waved for me to come in farther. So I did. Mom said, Oh my gosh, so you voluntarily walked into their trap? Ricky said, Well, I'm not sure that's what it was. I stopped after 2 more steps and a hole opened on the snowman's other side. Some sort of device came out, and he walked around me on those Y-shaped feet. It was kind of like he was scanning me. The 3 dudes, they moved closer to each other. They seemed to be looking toward me at the same time, and the snowman guided me away from them. All of a sudden, walls came down from the ceiling around me. A chair materialized somehow, and then a big glass of water appeared on the floor, and that's all that happened until the wall vanished, and I could see the open portal, and I walked out and saw Leo. Well, hey, I said, Hey, bro, holy smokes. Do you think the snowman was a being or a robot? Well, bro, Rook said, I believe the snowman was a robot. It looked like the 3 dudes, but it was as though it was maybe an idealized dude, an idealized thing. The dudes had extremities, but they were kind of gangly. And the snowman, well, he was sleek. He had this band around his head that seemed to let him see in almost all directions at the same time. While the dudes, they had a single eye or something like that in the uppermost snowball. I asked, Did they ever talk? And he said, They didn't have visible mouths, and they made no sounds I could hear. They must have communicated, maybe with frequencies I couldn't detect, but probably through some telepathic or electrical transmission. Beats me. I said, that explains something for me. The unwillingness to communicate I imputed to the snowman made me fear him. I confused his apparent unwillingness to communicate with the evil intent. And Pop said, We know these metal eel-like creatures in the South China Sea, they consumed uranium. Rookie, since the beings in the spaceship were also after uranium and radiation stuff, do you think they were exposed to radiation in their ship? Do you think you were exposed to radiation in their ship? When they built that room around you, do you think they isolated you to protect themselves from you, or were they protecting you from their own radiation? Rookie replied, Hey, good questions, Pops, but I don't know the answer. Mom darted toward her workshop. I'm getting my Geiger counter and checking you boys for radiation exposure. Rook and I gave each other worried looks and were happy when Mom returned, scanned us, and gave us the all-clear thumbs up. Pop sniffed the air, and he said, Ooh, pancake batter. It's calling my name, and it's asking to be fried. But before we eat, I have one more question. Rookie, just what was it that made you walk up the spaceship's plank? Rook said, Well, I thought it'd be cool to be the first Earthling to enter an ET spaceship. The ship had landed and sent out that walkway, but since nobody had chased after me, I figured I'd be safe, and heck, I'm brave, you know. Yeah, Pop said, you're brave, but you're also lucky. Lucky the Borisov group don't harbor evil intentions. Consider how Leo handled his own movements up there. Just think now. You know, he took precautions. He prepared to defend himself. But he gave that snowman the benefit of his doubts, and he didn't need to use the stun gun. I know he had time to think and prepare that you didn't have, but it's a good model for you to keep in mind if there's ever something like this again. Mom added, Yep, good lesson there. And I'm hungry too, but Rookie, one more question from me. How did it feel to ride in that spaceship? Rookie looked dumbfounded and said, Huh? What do you mean? I just sat there, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. Finally, they let me out, and I ran down the ramp. Whoa, I said. That's your answer, Mom. Let's chew on that along with our pancakes. The end.